The Gray Dawn of the Eastern Front, 1941. The eastern horizon at dawn was gray, heavy with gunpowder, wet clay, and the stench of rotting timber. Trenches snaked endlessly across the landscape, and in them, pressed against the cold earth, German soldiers of the Wehrmacht greeted another day. Hans, a Bavarian corporal, lay on his back beneath a low ceiling of planks and sandbags. His body, still unhardened by years of marching, ached with a dull, almost painful tension deep in his abdomen. Back home in Munich, his wife Anna waited, her hands warm and her voice soft. But here, thousands of kilometers away, memories of her only deepened his longing. Beside him, in a neighboring foxhole, Otto, a veteran of the Polish campaign, rolled a cigarette from coarse tobacco and newspaper scraps. A white scar ran down his sun-weathered cheek, twitching with each drag. They said nothing to each other. There was nothing left to say. The front had taught them silence. Their unit had been pushing eastward for 3 months. Behind them lay scorched villages, shattered tanks, and bodies in roadside ditches. Ahead lay only uncertainty. Yet beyond their fear of the Red Army, the men carried another burden, an unrelenting physical need that the Army tried to regulate, but could never truly suppress. Command knew well. Orders rasped out by hoarse-voiced NCOs repeated the same warning: avoid contact with the local population, risk of venereal disease, risk of espionage. But decrees remained ink on paper. Reality was far harsher. The first village where they stopped for the night was called Borki. The houses stood crooked, roofs collapsed, but in one barn a flicker of life remained. A young widow, no more than 25, with hollow cheeks and eyes already dimmed by grief, stepped out toward the soldiers. She held out no hands in plea, she simply stood there. Hans noticed how her gaze lingered on his ration pack, a can of stewed meat, a chunk of black bread. That evening, after the company settled into a peasant hut, he returned to the barn. She was waiting. She said nothing, undressed mechanically, and lay down on the straw. Hans did what he had to do quickly, almost ashamed of his own breath. She offered no resistance, nor any participation. She merely lay there staring at the ceiling. When it was over, he left the food and walked away. By morning, she was gone. No one spoke of it. It was as ordinary as the distribution of ammunition. Otto, the elder by experience, explained it to the newcomers around the evening fire. Your body demands it. Otherwise you'll go mad. It was the same in Poland. In France it was better. They had official brothels. Here, you'd take what you can get. He himself preferred solitude. At night, beneath his blanket, hand clamped over his mouth so as not to wake his comrades, he relieved the pressure, recalling his wife or the pin-up girls from pre-war magazines he kept hidden in his duffel bag. But even he sometimes gave in, especially after combat, when adrenaline surged through his veins and demanded release. By autumn 1941, the unit reached Smolensk. The city smoldered, its streets choked with rubble. In the rear areas, in requisitioned houses, the first Wehrmacht brothels, Wehrmachtsbordelli, began to appear. These were no Parisian salons. They were modest establishments marked by red lanterns and guarded entrances. The women, recruited from asocial elements, prostitutes, widows, sometimes forcibly taken from occupied territories, were examined by military doctors, given clean sheets, condoms, and a strict schedule. 20 minutes per soldier, followed by disinfection. Hans heard of a brothel in Kharkiv. When his company was granted a 2-day leave, he went with his comrades. A queue stretched along the wall. The men smoked, exchanged jokes, but their eyes were weary. Inside, the air reeked of carbolic acid and cheap perfume. The women sat in a common room on wooden chairs, in worn dresses, numbered tags pinned to their chests. One of them, dark-haired, in her 30s, with a tired face and a bruise beneath her eye, gestured for Hans to follow him into a side room. There stood a narrow cot with a gray blanket and a basin of water. She avoided his gaze, undressed, and lay down. Hans did what he had to do, quickly, almost ashamed of his own breath. She offered no resistance, nor any participation. She merely lay there, staring at the ceiling. When it was over, he left the food and walked away. It was official, sanctioned, and that lifted a weight from his shoulders. Yet a residue remained, as though the war had turned intimacy into mere transaction.
As they pushed deeper into Russia, brothels grew scarce. In field conditions, soldiers returned to improvisation. In villages where they bivouacked for the night, local women sometimes approached of their own accord. Hunger outweighed shame. In the winter of 1941, near Moscow, the unit occupied a small homestead. A mother and her 2 daughters lived there. The elder, barely 18, offered herself to an officer in exchange for a sack of flour. The officer refused, but the men whispered that someone had taken her anyway. Hans did not partake, but he heard moans in the night and saw the girl leave at dawn, clutching food in her hands. It was ordinary, like the issue of rations. Otto spoke of worse things, of forced requisitions by the SS, of women taken to camps. But their company tried to stay within bounds. Still, tension mounted. Some younger soldiers sought comfort in homosexual encounters, a grave offense under Nazi ideology, punishable by death. Hans knew a boy from a neighboring platoon caught in the act with a comrade. He was sent to a penal battalion, died near Jev. Most kept silent, endured alone, or relied on illicit pornography. Nude postcards of idealized Aryan women passed hand to hand, stamped with the phrase, "For tapfere Soldaten," for brave soldiers. By spring 1942, the front stabilized. Before the great offensive on Stalingrad, several brothels opened. Hans visited one. Housed in a former school, it operated with clinical efficiency. The women were vetted, carried medical cards. The routine was mechanical. Payment in Reichsmarks, a brief encounter, disinfection. Officers claimed it boosted morale, but for Hans, it was only temporary relief. He watched the war change men. Some grew coarse, demanding more than the system allowed. Then the guards would intervene, dragging them out by the collar. Between battles, soldiers swapped stories. Fritz, a sharp-tongued Berliner, bragged of a Frenchwoman he'd bedded behind the lines. "They know how it's done, not like our village girls." But such luxuries were rare for ordinary troops. More often, it was quick encounters in barns or woods with locals. The risk of syphilis or gonorrhea was high. Medics distributed sulfa drugs, but treatment was painful, and men often hid symptoms to avoid losing leave. As the front moved into Crimea and the Caucasus, the situation grew more complex. Local women, Tatars, Armenians, sometimes approached voluntarily, seeing Germans as liberators from Soviet rule. Yet High Command warned, race above all. Relations with non-Aryans were tolerated but never encouraged. Hans remembered a night in Sevastopol after the siege. Soldiers celebrated. Women from the port offered themselves for food. He took part, then wrestled with guilt. His wife at home awaited his letters. By summer 1942, the tension peaked. In the steppes' heat, soldiers dreamed incessantly of women. With brothels far behind, frustration sometimes erupted into violence, though officially forbidden. Hans's unit heard rumors of SS raids, of women seized for labor, but they tried to hold the line. Otto, the elder, would mutter, "Hold on, lads, the war will end and everything will return." In Rostov-on-Don, just before its capture, they found a black market thriving among the ruins of the railway station. Women, locals, refugees, former prostitutes traded openly. Hans watched Fritz trade his wristwatch for a night with a tall blonde, likely a Polish refugee. Hans himself walked past. He still held back, though his body ached. That night, alone in a basement, he lay on his back, closed his eyes, and found release beneath his blanket, imagining Anna and the warmth of her hips. It felt humiliating, but safe. High Command knew the problem. New OKH orders stressed all sexual contact exclusively through official channels, violation, court-martial. But official channels lagged hundreds of kilometers behind the front. In Kyiv, where the company paused for resupply, a brothel operated in a mansion on Hersiatic. Guards with submachine guns stood at the entrance. A line formed daily. Women lived in barracks behind the house. Volunteers, often coerced by hunger or threat of deportation. Weekly medical inspections, fresh linen every 2 weeks. The system ran like a factory.
Hans went the first evening, paid 15 Reichsmarks, received ticket number 47, waited in the corridor smoking. The room held an iron cot, a basin of hot water, sheets stained with old marks. A woman entered without a word, mid-30s, thin, short brown hair. She undressed, lay down. Hans was done in 7 minutes. She didn't move. Then rose, washed, left. At the sanitation station, the medic handed him a condom for next time and stamped his log, healthy. Safer than the streets, where partisans sometimes sent infected women as traps, revenge for burned villages. Otto, wounded by shrapnel near Voronezh, lay in a Kharkiv hospital. It had its own brothel, for convalescents. When Hans visited, Otto told him, worse in Poland, better in France. Parisians knew how to please. Here, it's like an assembly line. Yet even an assembly line was salvation. Venereal disease ravaged the ranks, syphilis, gonorrhea, chancroid, up to 15% of troops affected. Medics injected salvarsan, but treatment was agony, and men hid symptoms to avoid the infirmary. By autumn 1942, the unit approached Stalingrad. The siege cut off access to brothels. The city burned, streets were choked with corpses. Women hid in basements, but some emerged for food. Hans traded half a loaf of bread for a quick act in a ruined house. She was young, 20, with black eyes. She wept, but she ate. He felt like a beast, but the war dictated the rules. Otto, wounded by shrapnel near Voronezh, lay in a Kharkiv hospital. It had its own brothel, for convalescents. When Hans visited, Otto told him, worse in Poland, better in France. Parisians knew how to please. Here, it's like an assembly line. Yet even an assembly line was salvation. Venereal disease ravaged the ranks. Syphilis, gonorrhea, chancroid, up to 15% of troops affected. Medics injected salvarsan, but treatment was agony, and men hid symptoms to avoid the infirmary. By autumn 1943, on the Kursk salient, tension returned. Without brothels, soldiers improvised. In villages, women exchanged their bodies for protection from partisans. Otto took another companion, a young Ukrainian woman who'd fled Kyiv. She lived with him in a hut, cooked, satisfied him. Almost like home, but the war destroyed everything. After the Stalingrad disaster, the retreat began. In the rear, in Poland, brothels reopened. In Warsaw, elite establishments for officers secretly employed Jewish women, contrary to racial laws. Hans heard rumors but never verified them. His unit was billeted in Krakow. The brothel occupied a former hotel on the market square.
The women, Poles, had been sterilized and guarded by the SD. Procedure, medical check, payment, intercourse. Hans went to forget Stalingrad's horrors. The woman was young, dark-haired. She smiled professionally, but her eyes were dead. He did his business and left. In 1943, on the Kursk salient, tension returned. Without brothels, soldiers improvised. In villages, women exchanged their bodies for protection from partisans. Otto took another companion, a young Ukrainian woman who'd fled Kyiv. She lived with him in a hut, cooked, satisfied him, almost like home. But the war destroyed everything. By winter 1943-44, brothels had become standard in occupied zones. In Riga, Latvia, they were segregated for enlisted men and officers. Women, Latvians, Lithuanians, were racially vetted. Hans visited the enlisted brothel. Clean, efficient, 15 minutes, disinfection. Emotionally empty. He noticed how men changed. Some grew brutal, demanding more. Guards stepped in, dragged them out. As the retreat deepened in 1944, the system crumbled. In Belarus, soldiers seized women by force, though forbidden. Command turned a blind eye. Discipline matters, but morale matters more. Hans saw a group from a neighboring platoon take a girl into the woods. He walked away, but the sounds haunted his nights. Otto, wounded again, lay in a Minsk hospital. Its brothel served the wounded. He repeated his refrain, "Better in France. Parisians knew how to please. Here, it's like an assembly line."
In Hungary and Romania, brothels adapted. Local women, now allies, came more willingly, yet disease spread. Penicillin arrived, a new miracle drug, but supplies were scarce. Soldiers shared vials. Hans caught gonorrhea in Budapest, treated in a field hospital. Painful, humiliating, but he survived. Otto died near Brody in July 1944, shrapnel to the neck. Hans was alone. Memories of frontline nights, brothels, barter, violence, blurred into a gray mass. He wrote letters to Anna but never sent them. What could he say? That he was no longer the man she married? By autumn 1944, the front had rolled back into Poland. In Łódź, a brothel operated in the former Palace cinema. The women, secretly from the liquidated ghetto, were kept in the basement, brought out on schedule. Hans went, driven by despair. The woman was thin, with a tattoo on her arm. She said nothing. He did what he had to do, then wept alone. By winter 1944-45, the front was collapsing. Hans's depleted unit retreated through Poland toward the Oder. Snow fell in thick flakes, covering craters, corpses, and the last embers of hope. Brothels were far behind. The nearest official one was in Łódź, but still miles away under enemy fire. The men carried not just fear, but a raw animal need that rations and cigarettes could no longer soothe. Hans marched with his head down, rifle on his shoulder, emptiness in his chest. In January 1945, in Łódź, the company got a brief respite. The brothel in the Palace cinema still stood, miraculously intact. Inside, dampness, carbolic acid, fear. Women from the ghetto, hidden in violation of every racial law, were kept in the cellar and brought out by shift. Hans went that first evening. The line was short. Many feared bombing raids. He paid his last Reichsmarks, received a ticket. The room, iron cot, basin of icy water, blood-stained sheet. A woman entered, silent, gaunt, tattooed, about 25. She undressed, lay down. Hans performed mechanically. She didn't move. Rose, washed, left. At the sanitation station, the medic marked his log, healthy. Hans stepped into the street and stood in the falling snow, tears freezing on his cheeks. The retreat continued. In Silesia, brothels vanished entirely. Soldiers took women by force. Command looked away.
Hans saw a group drag a girl into a barn. He walked off, but the memory echoed in his nights. Alone in his trench, he relieved himself with his hands, thinking of Anna. In February 1945, the front neared Berlin. Hans was transferred to the Western Front, the Ardennes. Conditions differed. Some Belgian and French brothels still operated under Wehrmacht control. In Brussels, he visited one in the former Metropolis Hotel, elegant with champagne, women in silk robes. He traded his last watch for an hour. The woman was French, 30, with a practiced smile. She knew how to please. For 1 hour, Hans forgot the war, then returned to his trench and became a soldier again. By March 1945, the unit retreated into Germany itself. In the Rhineland, brothels served refugees. German women who'd lost everything offered themselves for food. Hans watched a comrade trade cigarettes for a night with a widow from Cologne. He held back, but his body demanded relief. In April, in Berlin, chaos reigned. The city burned. Women offered themselves for shelter from bombs. Hans took one, a refugee from Silesia. In a basement, beneath artillery fire, they found a moment of closeness, not transaction, but shared desperation. She wept. So did he. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered. Hans was captured by Americans. In a POW camp, he met Otto, alive, missing an arm, but alive. They spoke neither of the front, nor of women, nor of brothels. They simply looked at the sky and were silent. Hans returned home in 1946. Anna was waiting, but she had changed. So had he. The war left scars, not only on the body. He never spoke of Smolensk, Kharkiv, Luge, of how need was met through brothels, barter, or force. That was war's dark side, long hidden by Germans. He lived quietly, worked in a factory, raised children. But at night, in silence, memories returned. Trenches, snow, women with empty eyes, brothels with red lanterns. The war had twisted everything: love, fear, desire. He survived, but part of him remained there, on the Eastern Front, in mud and blood.